Velkommen alle sammen. In my video a couple weeks ago, I asked you to write in the comments of the video which king you would like to see a video about, and the most votes were for Harald Fairhair, or Harald Fairhair. So here's the video. Before we start, I'll give you another little game. Who is my favorite king in the Viking Age? Write down in the comments below. The first one who guesses it right will get to pick the subject for the next video. Any subject you want, I'll do a video on it. So guess what you think my favorite king of the Viking Age is? Not my favorite historical figure, because my favorite heroes in the Viking Age are just regular men or chieftains. It has to be the king I'm talking about. Also, just beware, it might not be a unified king of a whole country. It might be one of the smaller petty kingdoms, and it might even be outside of Scandinavia. There were some great kings in the Viking Age that were not in Scandinavia too, so guess down in the comments. First one to guess it right will get to pick the topic for the next video. Anyway, on to Harald Fairhair. I'm gonna go over the biography first. I'm not gonna spend too long on it, because if it's way too long, that video would be many hours long, but I'm going to go through the most important events of his life and what he's famous for really quickly. But also, I'm going to go over some things that you don't know, so stick around to the second half of the video, because I'm going to tell you some things that I'm sure most of you don't know. But first, the basic biography. As always, disclaimer, sources say many different things. They're conflicting. Some scholars even suggest that he never even existed. This is like most things in the sources we have in the Viking Age. No need to get offended. If you know any stories about Harald Fairhair, please write it down below in the comments, but mention sources please. But of course, know that I can't go over everything, and also know that the things that I'm going over might be conflicting with other sources, but the sources that I'm using for this video are right here. So Harald Fairhair was born in the mid-800s, early Viking Age. His father was Halfdan the Black, a regional king of Vestfold. Then he ruled from Tønsberg, and also a very old royal house at Skaldic. And that's actually where my family is from. It's rare we have some great history in this part of the country, but in a way, this is actually where the unified Norway was first born, because that's where Harald Fairhair was born. Also, this was a time where the royal Yngling dynasty was almost extinct. These were kings that were descended from Odin, or said to be, and there were only two left, and that was Halfdan the Black and his brother, the famous Olav Geistadolf. So all these kings died pretty young, and it was just Harald Fairhair left pretty much carrying on the lineage. So Halfdan the Black died in a very interesting way that I'm going to speak about in a minute, but he died when Harald Fairhair was very young, still a teenager, and that is when he took over his father's small kingdom of Vestfold. It only took a few years after, and Harald became the first king of all Norway. So that is actually right, just like in the show Vikings. Harald was the first king of all Norway pretty much, but how he became king is very different in the show though. In the show, remember when they all sat around that little circle and Harald Fairhair basically cheated in order to beat Björn in the election? That did not really happen. What happened was a slow takeover, gaining the loyalty and support of many chieftains and other kings in Norway, and other chieftains and kings who opposed Harald. He beat in battle. He was really a great warrior. It took a lot of hard battles, and he fought bravely and strong, but eventually he did win control of almost all Norway when he was still very young, in his 20s, and he was really a great and brave warrior already at a young age, and this basically reputation carried him on to the rest of his life. He was known as a great warrior, and no one really wanted to stand up to him. This is kind of different from in the show, because in the show he was kind of a pussy, and he used kind of sneaking around and tricks to get his way. So that's Harald Fairhair in the show is actually far from the truth. What the show did get right, however, is that Harald met a princess called Gyda, who he wanted to marry, and she says she would only marry Harald if he becomes king of all Norway. And he says, ah, god damn it, alright. And it was then that he took a vow to not cut or comb his hair until he was king of all Norway, and it was called Þjóðkonungur, so people king. And what that was, it was basically the term for the recognized king of the kind of mainstream areas of Norway, because it's Norway. There are just way too many very remote areas, up in the mountains or up in the north of the country that could not be conquered back then. So he wasn't really king of all Norway like is commonly told, but he was king of all the established kingdoms and kind of recognized unified areas. It was usually along the coast, most of those towns. So the people's kings, as we call it, that was what it's called at the time. Anyway, it took some time. So his hair did grow long due to his oath that he took, and that's how he got his name Fairhair. I wish they would have given him a bit more accurate hair in the show, because they just used a little braid for him. There is not anything special about his hair at all here. Yeah, who knows? Then, of course, once Harald becomes king, all the girls want the D now. All of a sudden, Gyda especially came sniveling back, but Harald decided not to marry Gyda or any other single woman. He just married a whole bunch of women and banged a bunch and slaves, and I think he had about 20 kids, I believe. I'm not sure, I'll put it up here, but from many, many different women and wives. Other than that, he had a pretty normal life as king. He was quite strict, though. This was a big change in Norway. He was the strictest king and the unified king, and he set very high taxes, higher than any king had ever done before. So most of the common people really didn't like Harald Fairhair. He was an amazing warrior and undefeated in battle, but there were always going to be people who would stand up against him. And this, of course, came from the majority of the population, people who wanted to stand up against him. So what Harald did was very, very smart, actually. Bad, but very, very smart. He taxed people, very high taxes, but he distributed that wealth to all the powerful leaders, the chieftains, the farmers, the nobles. So then he gained the willing support of the people who had power, the most powerful men in the country, even though the average citizen did not like Harald, but the average person couldn't really do anything about it because all of the chieftains and leaders were loyal to Harald because they were the ones getting paid. I swear we learn absolutely nothing from history. Our leaders are still doing the same things today, making sure they pay off and get support from the few powerful organizations while they basically fuck over the average person. And we learn nothing from history, and you see these things repeat themselves over thousands of years. In fact, actually, in the Egil Saga, anyone, any regular person who was planning a rise in rebellion against Harald, they were given 3 options. They could either flee the country, submit themselves as a tenant to pay rent to Harald, even if it was their own land from before. The third choice was having their feet and hands cut off. So of course, most people took that first option. The smaller chieftains and regular people could not stand up to Harald, and the result was they migrated out of Norway, and that's what this mass migration in the Viking Age was that you know of. The Viking settlements were Norwegians especially. They were settling in the Faroe Islands, Scottish Islands, Iceland, Greenland, and so on. So the result was, of course, back then, Harald was the longest standing king that Norway, I think, ever had. He was king for more than 60 years. Unopposed, and pretty much any man who still had any balls left Norway. And in fact, most of the greatest Norwegian heroes from the Viking Age were actually born outside of the country, and they came back to Norway because really anyone, like I said, anyone with any balls left Norway because they didn't want to fall under Harald Fairhair's rule. Anyway, that's the basic biography, all the general things that you need to know. Harald ruled for the rest of his life pretty much unopposed relatively until his son Eric Bloodaxe inherited the throne. And there was actually a law. Harald Fairhair lived to be very old. He lived to be 83, but there was a law in Norway. You could still be king But after 80 years old, you were no longer allowed to be put in charge of the financial responsibilities of the country. Funny enough, that was a law, so the last 3 years he kind of shared the rule with his son, Eric Bloodaxe. Anyway, enough of his biography, now to some bonus info that you probably haven't heard. First one, there is a Skaldic poem about him, very famous. It's called Gerinismo. It speaks about a big battle of Harald's and his successes and his accomplishments and also his descendants from him, but it doesn't name him in this source. And remember, Skaldic poems are always the most accurate and reliable, but here it doesn't name him as Harald hárfagri Fairhair. It names him as Harald Luffa, meaning thick or tangle hair. This is probably more like mine, actually. Also, the coolest part of this poem is that it speaks about the Berserkers, or Ulfhednar, which is kind of like, at this time, it was the last time that Berserkers were really considered honorable and useful people in the Viking Age. Remember, I've said this before in other videos, in very old times, Berserkers were highly honored, disciplined, and valued warriors, very often served as the king's most trustworthy guards. In the late Viking Age, though, they were a bunch of dumbasses causing trouble and running around town, disturbing people, and everyone hated them. They were starting to lose the spiritual knowledge and lose the understanding of really what it meant to be a berserker. So at the time of Harald Fairhair in the early mid-Viking Age, that's when real berserkers were still existing. But after this time, they were slowly fading away into the horrible stories about them that we all hear. Another interesting story, in Halfdan the Black Saga, when Harald was just a young boy, there was a very mysterious and magical Finn, as they usually are, but a Finn came to the Yule feast and he stole some food. Halfdan the Black imprisoned and tortured this Finn, and Harald Fairhair begged his father for mercy on the Finn. But his father said no, but eventually Harald, a good boy, made friends with the Finn and he helped him escape. And they became friends, and he basically kind of gave good tidings to Harald in a magical way, which could be why he had such great luck in the future. The Finn also got revenge on Halfdan the Black, and cursed him so that he died by falling through an ice in a river, and that is when Harald became king at that very young age of just Vestfold. So the story here, the only reason I bring this up is that the story is almost identical to the poetic Edda poem Gerinismo, where Odin in disguise basically comes to a feast and asks for some food, and he gets locked up by the king, this greedy king, and then this king's son comes to Odin and helps him, and in return Odin teaches him, becomes friends with him, and he teaches him some very wise things, and he speaks all about Valhalla. And this poem, Gerinismo, is actually the most vivid description of Valhalla that we have. So some think that this story is based off the real time when Harald Fairhair basically stopped his father from torturing the Finn and helped him escape. That this could be the same thing, that Finn was secretly Odin, and the child in Gerinismo was actually Harald Fairhair, but who knows, that's just an idea. Third interesting bit of info, contrary to the mainstream view, Harald Fairhair was not an enemy of England. He was actually a very good friend of the English king Athelstan at the time. The Danes, they were the ones who were kind of at constant war with England in the early Viking Age, especially in the early Viking Age. But the Norwegians were allies with the English more often than not. Harald spent a lot of his late life in England, and he was also good friends with the English king Athelstan, so much that he actually sent his son Haakon to be fostered by this English king. And Haakon grew up to be a great man and one of the best kings that we ever had, and it was actually Harald Fairhair's son, but he basically let him be raised in England by the English king. So their show portraying Harald and his hate and constant attack of England is inaccurate. Most people don't know that. Final fun fact, this is the Magic and Beliefs channel, so we have to speak a bit about magic. Harald hated wizards. Vitki, as they were sometimes called, male magic practitioners. There were numerous times where he ordered them to death and ordered them hunted down and all that. But Harald really had a thing for witches, Völva, the female magic practitioners. He sent for them all over the land. He even married one from Finland, a beautiful woman said to be, and he married her on the very first night that they met. Her name was Snafrid, and basically she was so beautiful that he wanted to bang her, but her kind of, I think it was her mother, and she said, no, 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 none of that here. You have to marry her if you want any of this. And she said, oh, okay, okay. Then he marries her that very night, and then it was his most beloved wife, actually. He stayed with her, but she died very soon after, but he was so in love with her and got so much help from her in magical ways that he kept her body for 3 years, and legend has it that she did not decompose at all. She was just as beautiful then as she was when she was living. So that is the story, at least. Take from that what you will, but I hope you learned a couple new things there. Those are just some fun facts about Harald Fairhair that most people don't know. So that's all I have to say for today. Remember to comment below who you think my favorite king in the Viking Age is, and yeah, we'll do some more videos on this soon. Vi ses nästa gång.